Hey folks, Direwolf here. I want to respond to the reasonable questions for anti-SJW video because I think it's a great opportunity for me to touch on a lot of different subjects and what I think about them, and for you guys to get a good idea of how I feel on a spectrum of different topics. So let's get into it.
Are you able to understand the irony of responding to the perceived political correctness of the left with exasperated reactionary hypersensitivity of your own?
No, you can't compare SJW rhetoric with response videos. The rhetoric is being used to actually push policies that affect our everyday lives, whereas the response videos is a responsible counter to bad ideas. It is the duty of rational people to counter bad ideas, not silence the voices, just defeat the idea.
What is it with you people and skulls?
I don't know why you think this is so important, but just because you mentioned it twice, I'm going to have skulls all over this video.
How do you define right-wing? Anti-SJWs often have an aversion to being labelled as right-wing, yet they regularly defend the right and bash the left. Therefore, why is being labelled right-wing a bad thing to you? And if it's because right-wing is used as a pejorative, can you not see how labelling people as SJWs or regressives is also pejorative?
Well, when you use the term right-wing to describe people like Sargon of Akkad or Bering or Thunderfoot, you're incorrectly describing them because they're very liberal, not right-wing. If you describe me as right-wing, you'd be more accurate because I am more right-leaning than they are. However, it's a very broad term, and sometimes people don't want to be called such a broad category because then they will be pressured to defend all of the different points of views and opinions expressed from people in that group. Similar to how feminism is a very large group with some people who are rational and many people who are not rational. However, SJW is a much more narrowed down description.
Rather than telling people you disagree with to drink bleach, wouldn't it be more productive for you to have an actual conversation about the issues you feel matter? Or is it just easier to do the bleach thing?
If every SJW were to drink bleach, it might increase the overall average IQ for the humanity. But think of the stress on the hospital system. I don't think Obamacare would survive. It would cost literally millions of dollars. Okay, my serious answer is I would never encourage someone I disagree with to go drink bleach. I don't do that in my videos, and I don't support other people doing it. From what I've heard from Leafy, it tastes pretty terrible anyways.
You claim to be proponents of rational, logical, evidence-based argumentation. That's great. That's entirely laudable.
I kind of like this guy's accent. Maybe he's got a good question.
But when I look at your online activity, when I look at, I don't know, for example, your Twitter feed, that's often not what I see. How do you reconcile this claim to be evidence-based and rational and logical against stuff like, oh, I was just trolling you, oh, I was just shitposting, or TLDR?
I haven't done that, I won't do that, and I don't encourage anyone to do that.
Are you aware that the ridiculous buzzwords you helped to popularize, like SJW and cuck and regressive, have all lost whatever meaning they once had and only serve now as casual insults and pejoratives to derail any meaningful conversation?
Are you aware that because of SJWs, that sexist, racist, and homophobe have all lost their meanings? Hey, how about you stop using those terms to describe everyone who disagrees with you? Then maybe we can discuss not calling an SJW an SJW. But at least our terms are accurate and your terms are just there to shut down conversation.
In videos and in the comment sections, anti-feminists often take up the most extreme or the weakest feminist position they can find, or they just straight up misrepresent what the feminist position is. Instead, why not take up the strongest, most robust feminist argument you can find and really challenge yourself?
Anti-feminists have no problems with the original egalitarian views of feminism. They attack the crazy views that air conditioning is sexist or saying hello is sexual assault, the myth of the wage gap, and the myth of rape culture. Not because they're cherry-picking the weaker ideas, they're picking the ideas they disagree with and want to defeat because they're wrong and because they're bad for our culture.
I am deeply concerned with male addiction rates, suicide rates, and abuse rates because I have worked with these issues in the quote-unquote real world. Would you be willing as anti-feminists to put aside your differences with feminists for the greater good of addressing these issues, especially as the kind of solutions needed are not necessarily gendered? And if so, I would actually like you to let me know, because I'm not fucking around or presenting any gotchas here. I actually really think that we could get something done if we work together. So yeah.
Chris, I believe this is the only reasonable question in this entire video. And possibly because it's neither an SJW or feminist issue. It is just a cultural issue that we should always be working on. I belong to a social group that has a very high rate of post-traumatic stress and suicide. So of course, I'm always working towards combating this. And anyone who wants to help, I'm willing to work with. I'm aware we have very little in common. However, addressing mental health would answer a lot of the issues we both care about, from gun violence to the trans community to the military and police communities.
What is third wave feminism? Because I've often heard you folks insist that you have no objection to feminism in general. It's specifically third wave feminism that you have a quarrel with. So what is third wave feminism specifically? And what specifically about third wave feminism do you have such a problem with?
That's a great question. I think that should be answered by a feminist. How about Christina Hoff Sommers?
In the late 60s, early 70s. And that was the second wave. And it had work to do. There were a lot of just arbitrary barriers preventing women, holding women back. They needed to be taken down. Changing the workplace, changing education, addressing things of, legally for women to have more defenses against harassment in the workplace and so forth. All of that, I was totally on board. Mm-hmm. That's just basic quest for equality. But what happened is that the second wave of feminism, a lot of the women in the universities were quite radical. And they were not about equality. They were not about, I see feminism, the best of feminism, it came from the European Enlightenment. And it was about the intrinsic dignity of all men and women and extending equality of opportunity and liberty and so forth to all. Many of them reject the Enlightenment, and they're not about freedom and freedom of expression, and they are they use their classrooms, I think, to promote a very rigid worldview about how women are preyed upon by men, and it's almost as if better things got for women, the more bitter they became. Their views will not withstand 20 minutes in a seminar room with some just objective scholars, but they do not subject their research to scrutiny of objective scholars. They evaluate one another. And I thought they would be contained in the academy and then would go away. That has not happened, partly because of social media and these Twitter mobs and things. It's come into the mainstream, and now we hear these words like trigger warning. The second wave had a radical extreme, and that extreme became the mean because they got a monopoly on the professorship. Well, third wave is probably the intersectional feminism, or there are various names for it, but it didn't correct the excesses of second wave feminism. It took those excesses and made them even more extreme. And there were women like me, Camille Paglia, a lot of libertarian feminists, dissident feminists. We were just disinvited to the party, and students didn't have the benefit of hearing a range of opinion on contentious issues.
Sorry for the long clip, but I think it's pretty relevant to your question. In short, anti-feminists aren't against first wave and the majority of second wave feminism. The egalitarian anti-feminists are opposed to feminism now in its current form because it has gone from fighting for the rights of women into a cultural Marxist group that fights for the superiority over straight white males.
Why is it that this feminist represents all feminists, but this men's rights activist doesn't represent all men's rights activists?
Whoa, wait, sexism all of a sudden? Ladies and men are different? So we're supposed to punch men and not hit ladies and open doors for men, but not ladies? Fuck you, get out of my face, you tiny piece of shit.
Because that feminist was part of a group a reoccurring group yelling the same things, and that was a single occurrence of one man.
Why am I continually asked to answer for the views of feminists if I agree with feminism's overall aims, but don't agree much with those particular feminists? Does that mean that I can ask you to answer for anybody who labels themselves similarly to you, even if you don't agree much?
Many anti-SJWs and anti-feminists have called out their peers for being ridiculous. However, according to the ranting feminist, feminists will not call out other wrong feminists because they don't want to be seen as going against other feminists. If you fail to distinguish yourself from the members of your group that are wrong, then you will of course be assumed to believe the same things.
If SJWs are bad because they spend too much time whining and don't talk about real problems, then why aren't you talking about those problems instead of just whining about the other people over and over and over for literally years? I mean, in the scale of priorities, that's like even lower, right? You know, you've got the real problems, you've got the things that feminists worry about, and then you've got you going, how dare they? Just, how dare they have different priorities from me? Why can't they do what I do? Whine about whining forever for a living. That's healthy.
Alright, you smug asshole. These SJWs are trying to make a movement to push government policy that will affect our lives, and if there's not a strong counter-argument, they might be effective in doing so, and they have in many places.
Why don't you seem as concerned with actual feminist theory in academia as you are with wrecking people for views?
Why are you in where I assume is your laundry room, and your question's dumb? Next!
Since so many of you profess to be admirers of second-wave feminism as opposed to third-wave feminism, I thought it would be interesting to ask which second-wave feminists in particular do you appreciate? Which books written by second-wave feminists have you read and found interesting? Which second-wave feminist activists have you specifically admired as you formed the opinion that you like second-wave feminism but you have no use for third-wave feminism? I'm just curious.
Christina Hoff Sommers. Thought I was clear about that.
Why is trying and failing to debunk a study into sexual assault the #1 priority for a rational thinker now? Does it maybe say something about your priorities? Does it maybe? Nah, it's fine, it's the feminazis, we have to stop them. They're taking away our video games.
Failed to debunk? It's been debunked over and over again. FBI statistics do not show that 1 in 4 women have been raped. We focus on issues like this because they drive government policy and political discourse. You don't want to accept this lie as a premise for your imaginary patriarchy.
One of the major arguments that I see in many of your videos is that it is possible to separate criticism of the religion of Islam from the actual Muslim people. And yet, this line seems to be crossed very often. I see things like raghead or camel fucker or other things like that in your comment sections. I see people taking very serious shots at Muslims in videos and hangouts, and they don't get called out. At least not that I can see. So my question is this: why should a person of conscience who is concerned about the Muslim people and their community not being harmed or mistreated, why should they believe that you're actually only attempting to look at the ideas and talk about the ideas if you ignore bigotry that's occurring right in front of you? And in that light, would you be willing to break bread and salt with moderate Muslim people on your videos, have hangouts, invite them to your channels, just in order to build some bridges there and to learn more about what they think and how they feel and what their experience has been, so that information and knowledge can be furthered?
People like me daily put our lives on the line to both protect and improve the lives of Muslims around the world. I do not attack any Muslim because they are Muslim. However, I do know there are portions, sects of their religion that teach a dangerous ideology, and I will attack the ideology in the realm of ideas to defeat those negative ideas. And I would call out anyone who would attack the Americanized Muslims who are part of our culture. But let me ask you a question. When was the last time you defended a Christian and his or her right to believe, and their rights? When was the last time you called out someone else who was insulting and degrading a Christian? I respect your concern for the Muslim populace. However, most people in the atheist community have used Christians just like white straight males as punching bags, and I wonder how far your concern goes.
Do you deny that systemic racism against black people is like a thing in general? If so, what? Okay, just step up, just cover your ears for a second and let the smart people talk.
If I have to accept your incorrect premise to answer your question, then I guess I'm not answering your question. Plus, I already made a video on that topic. You should go watch it.
If you've ever discussed or done a video about black on black crime, when are you going to do a video about white on white crime and what we as white people can do to solve the problems in our community?
I would not divide my community racially. Violence in my community is violence in my community.
Why is a literal teenager's
opposed to a figurative teenager?
Different definition of racism from you so horrifying that you all have to go, no! No, we have to stop him! We've got to debunk him now! Ah!
Those who believe in truth, reason, and logic will counter lies and fallacy. Simple as that.
Wherever did you get the idea that racism was a self-applied identity? And if the only true racists are the racists who self-identify as racists, how can we ever expect to make any social progress to reduce racism? Or did I just answer my own question?
That is a very dumb question. You're an idiot. No one believes that. Next question.
You often say that you are for equality of opportunity, but if people of color, for instance, have to overcome barriers whites do not, such as discrimination and unequal treatment, as are well documented in various studies, then how can the current situation be thought of as equal opportunity in any real way? And why do you consider it racist to discuss these issues?
Only fair system is a system where everyone is equal under the law, regardless of their race. The moment you build into the system a preference towards one race or another to correct past wrongs, you have just built racism into the system. The only way to ensure equal opportunity at the national level is to ensure equality under the law. The greatest obstacles to opportunity are not systemic. They are a product of the microcultures that a person comes from. Correcting those cultures is what you should be focusing on, rather than trying to legislate racism into our country.
Do you understand basic English syntax? Like, if I say this cat is pretty, I don't mean that all other cats aren't pretty. Like, do you really not get why saying all lives matter in response to Black Lives Matter is not only racially insensitive, but just patently ridiculous?
Do you understand the syntax of shoot the cop, beat up the white guy, and burn this motherfucker down? Maybe you should reassure your fellow man of your intentions, because many very loud voices are saying that white lives do not matter. If you want people to believe that our lives matter, then maybe you should act like it.
Isn't it offensive to men to assume that a man could only ever want equality for women, and therefore be comfortable with feminism as a whole in order to get laid, and that reduces us to beasts? If that was the case, wouldn't I attempt to get laid from my views instead of not ever trying that?
Dude, your sexual dysfunction has nothing to do with me.
If you say you're an egalitarian, will you call out the man-hating slurs that you see coming from people within your community? People who use terms like cuck, beta male, faggot, or mangina? All of these things basically distill men down into thinking that the most important thing about them is to be having sex with a woman. That's rather offensive. So what are you doing to stop this kind of behavior in your community?
I think you're way overthinking these terms. I might not be calling someone a mangina because I think their only purpose is to fuck women. I might be calling him mangina because he needs to fit the traditional role of being a man, like he needs to man up. For instance, I might tell a fellow soldier, hey, mangina, pick up your arm, tighten down that tourniquet, and keep going. We got a job to do. Just put some dirt in it, you pansy. Yeah, I think you're being far too sensitive on behalf of men.
What is the number of followers, the number of likes, the number of dislikes, the number of retweets, the number of subscribers, any of those numbers, any of those metrics? What have they got to do with the argument?
Nada, nothing, zilch. Heck, I got 4 subscribers. Doesn't mean you're right and that I'm wrong.
Why is it that you go on and fucking on about safe spaces and trigger warnings and delicate little flowers, but continue to hide behind your cartoon avatars and your childish pseudonyms? And whenever anyone calls you out on your sexist, racist, homophobic, bigoted rhetoric, you become the argument of your own scorn and are hashtag triggered, as they say.
I seem to remember recently a cunty little black bear handing your ass to you in the arena of ideas. He was never triggered. He never lost control. He simply beat you with ideas. So much so that your infantile response was to edit his words to say something terrible. How pathetic are you, chicken fucker? You couldn't combat his actual ideas, so you had to edit them.
Why do you find it so hard to believe that feminists are being harassed online?
Freedom of speech does not mean freedom of consequence. When you say something dumb online, someone's going to respond.
Do you understand the key importance of reproducibility and repeatability in scientific research? That simply going to Google Scholar, doing a 30-second search for keywords and pulling out the first paper you find that backs up your stance is not a particularly credible way to do research. That you have to have a much broader overview, to read the material, to follow the citations through, to look at the broad brush approach to a particular problem. You do realise that you're as much of a social justice warrior as those you critique. It's just that you espouse a different form of social justice, a rather less considerate, rather less forgiving, rather less kind form of social justice.
Sorry, but there's no comparison, and trying to do so is very disingenuous. We do not riot when someone triggers us. We do not block your speakers from speaking in the colleges or in public areas. We do not try to block out all dissenting voices, and we are not cultural Marxists. We do not try to control your lives. We are not perpetual victims, and we do not create fake news stories to push our narrative. There's a lot of things we are not, the SJWs are, and because of that, sir, you've just lost all credibility.
As a supporter, as a proponent of freedom of speech, why do you want to quash academic freedom? If you're not familiar with the concept of academic freedom, it's worth, in the UK at least, looking up the 1988 Education Reform Act and seeing what that says about the rights of academics to put across unpopular opinions.
We don't. And I could ask you the same question because it is the SJWs that are forcing out dissenting opinions from their schools. It is because of this that they have created an echo chamber that is producing people who only have heard one voice and are completely adverse to hearing any counter-argument. In any case, this will be my last answer for the reasonable questions for anti-SJWs. Honestly, most of these people are beyond reason. However, curiosity, if you want to debate, if you want to talk about those issues, you can contact me. As for this video, it's gone on way too long already. Direwolf out!